Hi, I'm Jim Allen. I'm from the University of Minnesota. I have no conflicts to disclose, and our work is funded by numerous grants from SAMHSA, National Institutes of NIAAA, NIMH, and NIMHD. And I'd like to talk today, I'd like to do three things. By the way, in a moment, I'll need your help to turn the video on. Thank you. Great. I'd like to turn the talk now to the positive and really some extraordinary developments happening right now in tribal communities. I'd like to provide answers to three questions. The first is why universal prevention? I'd like to make the case for that as part of the mix of what an effective response to what is really a public health crisis. I'd like to talk about why strengths-based, very briefly about some of the ethics of intervening in highly impacted communities. And then I'd like to spend most of my time discussing why cultural frameworks are essential to effective prevention strategies with this population. I'd like to begin by talking for a moment, though, about how Indigenous suicide is different. So this is some data that was provided to me from Jane Pearson at NIMH, and though it's a little bit dated, the most recent stuff from the National Violent Death Reporting System parallels this. What do you immediately see? The pattern of risk by age, when you contrast Indigenous people in the United States with, let's just pick European American non-Hispanic people, it's reversed. And before we talk about the elephant in the room and the really dreadful thing about it, I want to talk about the strength. If we could extend this line off further in development, it would show the highest suicide risk group in the United States. Does anyone know what that is? White males over age 85. It's the lowest risk group for Indigenous people. So my first point is I'm supposed to talk about generalizability, but within cultural distinctiveness are important generalizability lessons. There's one thing this group of people can really teach the larger United States. But let's return now also to the concern. The highest risk group are youth for suicide in this population. It calls for a different approach. That's why culture matters. That's why Indigenous suicide is different. In many ways, it does parallel concerns brought up with our veterans. And I think there are some commonalities where each group can learn from each other. I'm going to turn now to Alaska because that's where I do my work. However, I want to note that you'll find the data from Alaska is very similar to the rest of the United States. First, you see on the left is a rate of suicide for Alaska Native people contrasted to non-Native people statewide. And you see the rate is unfortunately 3 to 4 times higher. And it's even much higher than our concern area for veterans. We also notice on the bar on the right, it's overwhelmingly a male problem. But I want to hasten to point out that there's tremendous diversity. In fact, my colleague Joseph Trimble notes that Alaska Native, as American Indian, is an ethnic gloss. It describes an enormous diversity of geographies, languages, environments, economies, and histories, including those shared social determinants, also culturally distinct protective factors, and that provide strengths-based approaches. And we see this here in Alaska, where suicide is not a problem of Alaska Native people. It's a problem of some Alaska Native people. If you go to the Yukon-Kuskokwim region, where our team's work is, and in particular the Akuliaq region, you'll find the rates are even double the rates of the Yukon-Kashkokwit region in general. However, within that region, you'll find communities where suicide has not occurred for 30 years, other communities where there have been waves and clusters of youth suicide. So the reasons are complex, and they often return to social determinants and communities and things that we really do need to understand and really need to start thinking about communities and populations at risk. And this leads to how are you going to go in there? You're going to be invited into communities if you emphasize their strengths and you emphasize positive well-being approaches. And that's what we've been invited to do. And so I'd like to talk with you briefly for an approach based upon the concept of Qungasvik, which is a Yupik word that has to do with the men's house, the traditional living structures, and also a model of social organization, how you go about approaching and grappling with serious concerns and problems in the community. And the team has put together an intervention called Qungasvik, or Toolbox for Life. It's listed on the SAMHSA site as an emerging practice. It has been the focus of a special issue of the American Journal of Community Psychology. And what this does is promotes growth and protective factors to increase reasons for life and reasons for sobriety. We find the two are closely interrelated in terms of protection, and much of suicide is associated with, at the same time, alcohol use in this communities. So the intervention manual has a preview version on the web if you'd like to look at it. That's the address, and these are selections of the modules. But if you just focus on the activities, you miss the whole point of the intervention, again, which is built around the Qungasvik model, and again is built upon the concept of how do you bring a community together again. And you're going to hear the voices of my colleagues. Please go ahead. Started. Simeon John begins with a song that was written by his father.
In traditional Yupik culture,
This is Eliza, our linguist, Eliza Orr.
As a central place where everyone gathered together, the Qungasvik was an important place. It was a place to live during long winter months. It was a place to work on tools for survival. It was a place where important decisions were made and where people could go to get answers for life's great questions. The Qungasvik was a sacred place for ceremony and a place for purification. It was a place for teaching and learning. It was a place for healing and treating wounds, those old and new. The Qungasvik brought people and families together, creating community. When people began coming in from places far away, the Yupik world changed. The Qungasvik structure stopped being built and they collapsed into the earth. New practices brought new problems for the people. Without a Qungasvik to center the community, questions began to go unanswered and some wounds went untreated. This Qungasvik model demonstrates how some Yupik communities are recentering their communities by connecting youth to their healing paths and hopeful futures using a thousands of years old process to bring about change today.
Every time that the community wants to do something, that was a long time ago, the leaders of the community came together and they called that Qungasvik. And this is the way they passed on their knowledge, their wisdom, in all levels, not only the youth but the people in the community. The youth, the elders, and the families, everybody has a way of contributing to a community for the health and well-being of everybody. And at the community level, the churches, the clinic, the school, the village corporation, the tribe, and the city also have a role. And every one of their role in the community is very important, as it is with each individual. These are all important organizations. They play a big part in the daily lives and health and well-being of our kids. When we go to the state or the university or at the national level, even there, I think, I see a little bit of fragmentation and not enough communication with one organization to the other. And while we're duplicating, we might be, wasting a lot of our resources. Can we use the old system of Qungasvik and having them communicate with one another and support one another, or complement one another for the same goal, same objective for the health and well-being of the members of the community? Our ancestors, our forefathers, they knew what it took to bring out an issue in a protective way. These are just examples of protective factors that you could use. As you do an activity, you might come up with more protective factors, and some of them going to have community protective factors. Some of them going to be family. Maybe when we're focusing on individual protective factor, these other protective factors might come out during an activity. When we have an issue or a problem, we come together and identify a certain issue that needs to be resolved, and then identify the smaller group that might look at the issue very thoroughly. Qungasvik is an event. It includes as many members of the community that want to participate, so that Qungasvik would be a CPG. They would size down to a work group after identifying what activity they want to do. And then the work group would talk about what protective factors are we going to be teaching in an activity. Because while in an activity, you remember how when we get engaged, our minds are open to new things, and we learn a lot when our minds are open. Then we come back to Qungasvik then, and we talk about, was it useful, was it helpful? When we're young, we're dependent on our parents. But as the child goes, he understands learning how to do things, how to make a spear, how to make a trap, and becomes independent. And you become independent, you start to do things on your own. You're making the spears that you learned while you were growing up, learning to do trapping that you learned when you were growing up, and actually experiencing some of those things that maybe your parents would tell you in terms of consequences of the actions. This model is an attempt to bring back the system of Qungasvik of our ancestors that was handed down for years as intervention and prevention. And after all, thousands of years of this practice, it kept the communities and the people living together, harmony with one another, with the land and the spirit.
Okay, if you could stop, please. We're going to run out of time otherwise. So that was my co-investigator and colleague, Billy Charles, the native village of Imanic, and he and Stacy Rasmus wrote the description you just heard of the model for intervention. These are some of the activities, and as Billy was describing, this is not a risk reduction approach. This is a promotive approach, promotes protective factors in young people. These are some examples of the activities in young people participating. The protective factors are identical in two quite different activities here. They vary by activities, so multi-level intervention on the level family, community, and individual. These two focus on two individual level protective factors. One is very interesting. The Yupik word shlanik really is not directly translatable. It really relates to developmental conception, literally means to wake up, and it's about an awareness in the young person of his or her interdependence and interconnection with others in the community, with the animal world, and with the spirit world. And once you reach that, that defines adulthood. The other, communal mastery, is different than what a Western conception of mastery. This is an idea: I can solve my problems by seeking out others in my social environment to assist me in solving them. So the approach becomes very culturally patterned and grounded in local cultural beliefs and values, protective of the young person. We actually tested this. We have done research. This very quickly is some research we did a while ago. We developed measures, about a little over 20 of them, that tap different parts of the model. We found these protective factors on the individual, family, community level Billy was describing did function as intermediate variables, meaning the targets of our intervention, to influence two ultimate variables, which were reasons for life and reflective processes, the idea of Schlanik, reflective processes of the consequences of alcohol abuse or reasons for sobriety. And again, in a culturally patterned way, these community level factors accounted for most of the variance in the outcome. We also have tested this in a number of different ways. This is simply trajectories defined with functional data analysis. I'll explain it in a second. But it's comparing treatment in a comparison community who, at a point, they received different levels of the intervention. The darkened line are reasons for life, which you see grow and consistently exhibit higher levels of protection on behalf of the young people who participated in the higher dose intervention community. We're also looking right now at a prevention trial and doing analysis using a dynamic waitlisted design and across 4 communities. Hope to have this data later this year. So I want to conclude by saying just 3 things. That first of all, universal approaches are an important component with highly impacted communities and population. Culture, as a bedrock, provides protection and a tool for prevention, and that effective suicide prevention for this population is tailored and for all populations that these interventions serve. Thank you.